The day begins on a small gravel road outside Wooster, Ohio, where I still change my own oil and split my own firewood, because a man who forgets how to use his hands forgets something else along with it. That's a lesson nobody teaches you in a classroom. It gets carved into you by 38 years of early mornings on a factory floor, the kind of mornings where your breath fogs the windshield before the sun even bothers to show up. My name is Walter Combs, and before I tell you what my daughter said to me on the back deck of her father-in-law's lake house, I need you to understand something about the life I built, so you can understand exactly how far she drifted from it. I spent 38 years at a machining plant outside Akron, running lathes and later supervising 3 shifts of men who trusted me to keep their fingers attached to their hands. I never made more than $62,000 in a single year of my working life. But I never missed a mortgage payment either, and I put every spare dollar I had into a retirement account that a financial planner named Dennis Whitfield helped me build slow and steady, brick by brick, the same way I built everything else. My wife Carol died of ovarian cancer 4 years ago this coming October, and in her last clear week, when the hospice nurse gave us privacy, she held my hand and made me promise her one thing. She said, "Walter, promise me Sam won't have to struggle the way we did when we were starting out." Carol grew up sharing a bedroom with 4 siblings in a house that flooded every spring. I grew up watching my own father get laid off twice before I turned 16. So when Carol asked me that, lying there with tubes in her arm and a strength in her eyes that the disease never touched, I told her I promised, and I meant it with everything I had left in me. Our daughter, Samantha, Sam to everybody who loves her, married a man named Derek Pratt 3 years ago in a wedding that cost more than my first house. Derek's father is a man named Roland Ashworth, and Roland owns a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 counties, the kind of man who wears a watch that costs more than my truck and talks about building generational wealth the way other men talk about the weather. When Sam and Derek bought their house, a 5-bedroom place out on Hawthorne Ridge with a circular driveway and a saltwater pool, I watched my daughter's eyes light up in a way I hadn't seen since she was 7 years old on Christmas morning. Derek was working as an assistant manager at one of his own father's dealerships, pulling in maybe $58,000 a year in salary and commission. And I knew, because I've read a mortgage statement or 2 in my life, that a house like that came with a payment north of $5,000 a month, once you counted the taxes and the insurance and the HOA dues for that gated community. Derek believed his commission checks were covering it. He never once sat down and did the arithmetic, because why would he, when the lights stayed on and the pool stayed heated and nobody ever called asking where the money was? That's because I was the one making sure nobody called. Without telling either of them, I had Dennis set up an automatic transfer of $5,300 from my retirement account straight to their mortgage lender on the 3rd of every month. I did it quietly because I didn't want gratitude, and I didn't want to be a topic of conversation at their dinner parties. I wanted my daughter to feel secure, the way I never quite felt secure until I was almost 50 years old. Looking back now, I understand I was making a mistake, and I'll say that plainly, because a man who can't own his own mistakes has no business teaching anybody else a lesson. I thought I was protecting my daughter from hardship. What I was actually doing was letting her build a life on a foundation she had never once had to test with her own hands. Roland Ashworth entered the picture the way weather fronts enter a valley, loud and impossible to ignore. He drove a different car every few months, always something with a manufacturer's badge that cost more than a modest house. And he had a way of talking about his dealerships that made every room feel smaller. Every time we were together as a family, I watched Sam change. She started dropping phrases into conversation that didn't sound like her, talking about leveraging assets and scaling opportunities, phrases she'd clearly picked up secondhand from Roland's dinner table sermons. She used to call me every Sunday morning, just to talk about nothing in particular: the weather, a book she was reading, how her tomato plants were doing. Somewhere in the last year, those calls turned into updates about Roland's newest boat or Roland's newest investment property, and I let it slide, because I told myself she was just excited about her new family, the way young people get excited about shiny things before life teaches them what actually holds weight. The afternoon that changed everything was a Sunday in late September, 78 degrees, not a cloud in the sky over Portage Lake. We were on the back deck of Roland's lake house, a place with a boat dock and an outdoor kitchen bigger than my entire kitchen at home, and the caterers Roland had hired for what he called a casual family lunch were clearing plates of food I couldn't pronounce the names of. Roland was leaned back in a cushioned deck chair with a glass of bourbon sweating in his hand, holding court about how most people never escape what he called the paycheck mentality. He said, looking directly at me while he said it, "Some men just don't have the stomach for real risk, Walter. They punch a clock for 40 years, collect a little pension, and call that a life. No vision, no hunger." I sat there in the same short-sleeve button-down I'd worn to church that morning, my hands folded on the table, and I kept my mouth shut, because I've known men like Roland my entire working life, the ones who talk the loudest about risk, while somebody else quietly covers the downside. Then Sam spoke, and her words landed harder than anything Roland had said all afternoon, because they came from my own daughter. She was holding a glass of white wine, and there was a look on her face I had genuinely never seen directed at me before, something between pity and embarrassment. "Roland built everything he has from absolutely nothing, Dad," she said, her voice carrying easily across the patio table so that everyone, including the caterers stacking plates, could hear it clearly. "Meanwhile, you worked the same job for almost 40 years and you're proud of that? I love you, but you have to admit, next to somebody like Roland, you're basically nobody." Derek let out a short laugh into his glass and didn't correct her. Roland took a slow sip of his bourbon and looked at me the way a man looks at a stray dog that's wandered too close to his porch furniture. For a moment, the only sound was the water lapping against the dock pilings below us and a distant motorboat somewhere out on the lake. 2 years earlier, maybe even 1 year earlier, I would have argued back. I would have listed every double shift, every Christmas Eve I spent on a factory floor covering for a younger man with kids at home, every dollar Carol and I sacrificed, so Sam could have braces and a car that started reliably in February. But sitting there at that table, something in me didn't crack open in anger. It settled instead, cold and clear, the way water settles once you stop stirring it. I set my fork down on the linen napkin in front of me. I didn't raise my voice above a normal conversational tone, because I had already decided what I was going to do, and there was no need to perform it. "Then let Roland pay your mortgage," I said. "I'm done." Sam's smile faltered, and she glanced quickly at Derek, trying to salvage the moment in front of her in-laws. "What are you even talking about, Dad?" she said, forcing a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Roland doesn't pay our mortgage. Derek and I handle our own house just fine." I leaned forward and set both hands flat on the table, feeling the warm wood under my palms. "Sam," I said, keeping my voice level, "do you honestly believe Derek's salary at the dealership covers a $5,300 mortgage payment, plus property taxes, plus HOA fees in a gated community like Hawthorne Ridge?" I watched the color drain out of my daughter's face in real time, watched her mouth open slightly and nothing come out. Derek set his glass down hard enough that the ice cubes rattled. Roland's expression shifted from amused to alert, the look of a man doing quick math in his head. Sam's voice dropped to something close to a whisper. "Wait. What do you mean, my mortgage? What bills?" "I mean," I said, "that every single dollar of your house payment has come directly out of my retirement account for the last 31 months. $5,300, on the 3rd of every month, straight to Heartland Mortgage Group. You thought you two were living on Derek's commission checks. You weren't. You were living on mine." Sam stared at me across that table, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, she had absolutely nothing to say. I didn't wait around for her to find her words. I stood up, folded my napkin, nodded once toward Roland and said, "Thank you for the lunch." Then I walked out to my truck, an 11-year-old Ford F-150, with 200,000 miles on it, and not one payment left owed on it, and I drove the 40 minutes home in complete silence. The next morning, a Monday, I sat at my kitchen table with black coffee going cold in front of me and called Dennis Whitfield. "Dennis," I said, "the automatic transfer to Heartland Mortgage, the one for Sam and Derek's place. I need you to cancel it, effective immediately." There was a pause on the line before Dennis spoke again. "Walter, you're sure about this? If that payment stops, they're going to be in default inside of 30 days, maybe sooner." I told him I was certain. I told him it was time my daughter learned exactly what her own life cost. What I didn't say out loud, because it hurt too much to say it, was that I had spent 31 months protecting her from a truth she needed to face, and that Roland Ashworth had somehow convinced her that a lifetime of my honest work made me nobody. I hung up the phone and went out to split firewood for 3 hours, because some griefs you can only work through with your hands. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way that felt heavier than any argument could have. Sam didn't call. I understood later she assumed I was bluffing, that the payment would somehow keep going, or that Derek's next commission check would magically cover the gap the way it always seemed to before. She was living inside an idea of her own life that had stopped matching reality 31 months earlier, and reality doesn't wait patiently for anybody to catch up. The first sign that the mirage was cracking came on a Thursday evening in early November. I was at the hardware store in town picking up a new chain for my saw when my phone buzzed with a text from a man named Curtis Boyle, an independent mortgage broker I'd known since we coached Little League together 15 years back. The message read, "Hey Walt, strange question, but did Sam and Derek take out a second loan on that Hawthorne Ridge place? Derek came into my office today asking about hard money lenders. Seemed pretty shaken up." I typed back that I had no idea, that they handled their own affairs. And I meant it, because by that point I truly didn't know the specifics, only that the first missed payment notice from Heartland would have gone out right around then. Derek had gotten the past due notice from the bank. The automatic transfer that should have posted on the 3rd of November never came. Late fees had already started stacking on top of the missed principal. And for the first time in his adult life, my son-in-law was staring straight down the barrel of a bill he couldn't quietly ignore. He didn't call me. Of course he didn't call me. He went to Roland, because in his mind, Roland was the man who had built an empire from nothing, the man with the vision, the man who could fix anything with a signature. What Derek didn't know, and what almost nobody outside Roland's own accountant knew yet, was that Roland's empire was held together with far more debt than equity. He was leveraged to the edge of collapse across 2 failed commercial developments near the interstate, and he did not have 5 figures of liquid cash sitting around waiting to bail out his son's household. When Derek asked his own father for help covering the mortgage, Roland didn't hesitate before saying no. I heard about it later from Sam's Aunt Denise. Roland reportedly told Derek, "I don't throw good money after a sinking boat, son. If you can't afford your own house, maybe you should have thought about that before you signed for it. Don't bring me your problems." The man Sam had called a self-made empire builder, the man she'd used to call her own father nobody, wouldn't part with a single dollar to keep his own son's roof over his head. 3 weeks after that, on a cold Tuesday night in late November, with the first real snow of the season starting to stick to my driveway, headlights swept across my living room window while I sat reading by the wood stove. A car door slammed. My doorbell rang twice, quickly, followed by knocking that had real urgency behind it. I set my book down and walked to the front hall without hurrying, and when I opened the door, Sam was standing on my porch without a proper coat, just a thin cardigan, her face red from the cold and her breath coming out in visible clouds. Behind her in the driveway sat her SUV, engine still running. "Dad," she said, and her voice cracked on the single word. "Dad, we got a notice. The bank is starting foreclosure. We have 12 days to bring everything current, or they take the house. It's almost $14,000. Dad, we don't have it." I held the storm door open and stepped back to let her in out of the cold, because whatever else was true, my daughter was still my daughter, and no father makes his child stand outside in the snow to finish a sentence like that one. She came into the front hallway, shaking, wiping at her eyes with the back of her sleeve, and for a moment, she looked less like the confident young woman who'd humiliated me on that patio and more like the little girl who used to crawl into our bed during thunderstorms. "I talked to Roland," she said, the words spilling out fast and unsteady. "I thought he'd help. He wouldn't give us anything, Dad. He told Derek we were on our own. I don't understand. We're going to lose the house. I don't know what to do." She looked up at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was small enough for me to carry on my shoulders. Pure, desperate hope that I would simply fix it. "Please, Dad," she said. "Turn the payment back on. Please, I'll pay you back. I promise, every dollar." I didn't raise my voice. I walked into the kitchen, picked my reading glasses up off the counter, and put them on before I turned to face her, because I wanted to see her clearly, and I wanted her to see me clearly too. "Sam," I said quietly, "do you remember what you said to me on Roland's deck 2 months ago?" She flinched like I'd struck her, and her shoulders dropped. "Dad, please, I was just talking. I wasn't thinking. I was trying to impress Roland." "No," I said. "You meant it. You looked at a man who spent 38 years on a factory floor so you'd never once go without, and you called him nobody. You told me Roland built an empire from nothing while I settled for an ordinary life." "I was wrong," she said, and the tears finally broke loose, running down her face. "I know I was wrong. Roland's a fraud, Dad. He's drowning in debt. He doesn't actually care about either of us." "I already knew what Roland was," I told her, and I meant it plainly, without any satisfaction in being right. "I've known men like him my whole life. But that's not the point, Sam. The point is you looked at real sacrifice, real work, real love, and you decided it wasn't worth respecting because it never came wrapped in a leather interior." "Please," she said, stepping toward me with both hands out. "Just help us keep the house. Don't let us lose it." I looked at my daughter for a long moment, and I understood that if I picked up the phone right then and told Dennis to restart that transfer, she would learn absolutely nothing from any of this. She would go right back to measuring her worth, and mine, against Roland's watch and Roland's boat. "I'm not turning the payment back on, Sam," I said. Her face went pale and still. "What?" she said. "You're just going to let us get foreclosed on? You have the money, Dad. You're sitting on an entire retirement account. That money was built $1 at a time over 38 years, I said, keeping my voice steady. "And I gave you and Derek 31 months of a foundation to build your own life on. Instead, you used it to play a part you couldn't actually afford and to look down on the man who made it possible." I walked to the drawer by the phone, pulled out a notepad and a pen, and set them on the kitchen table between us. "Here's what's going to happen," I told her. "Tomorrow morning, you and Derek are going to call a realtor and list that house at a fair price, so it sells fast, before the bank takes it from you and you lose whatever equity is left. You'll pay off Heartland and keep whatever's left over." "Sell the house?" Sam said, her voice rising in near panic. "Dad, Derek will be devastated. What if this breaks our marriage? If your marriage can't survive living in a place you can actually afford on your own income," I said, "then you two have bigger problems than a mortgage payment." Sam stood in my kitchen breathing hard, staring at the notepad like it was a verdict handed down in a courtroom. The certainty that had carried her through that lunch on Roland's deck had finally cracked all the way open. "I don't even have money for moving costs," she whispered. "I don't have enough for a deposit on an apartment." I looked at my daughter for a long moment before I answered. "I won't pay your mortgage," I said, "because that would just be financing a lie a little longer. But I will cover the security deposit on a decent 2-bedroom apartment, and I will show up with my truck on moving day and help carry every box myself." That's what a father does. He doesn't fund an illusion. He helps you rebuild something real once the illusion falls apart. Sam covered her face with both hands and wept, and this time the tears sounded different, less like panic and more like something honest finally working its way out. The following 2 months were hard, but they were real in a way the previous 3 years hadn't been. Sam and Derek listed the Hawthorne Ridge house and sold it in a short sale just before Christmas, walking away with almost nothing but avoiding the foreclosure mark on their record. They moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street, the kind of place with a window unit, air conditioner, and a parking lot instead of a circular driveway. Roland never once showed up to help them move. Word around town was he was too tied up dealing with lawyers and lien notices of his own by then. On a Saturday in mid-January, I pulled my truck up to the curb outside their new building, and Derek came out first in an old sweatshirt and work gloves, looking sheepish but ready to work. Sam followed a moment later, her hair pulled back, no makeup, dressed for hauling boxes rather than posing for anybody. Together, the three of us carried furniture up 2 flights of narrow stairs for most of the afternoon, and by the time we finished, all our backs ached and nobody complained about it. Around 4 o'clock, once the last box was inside, we sat on folding chairs in their mostly empty living room, and Sam handed me a bottle of water from a gas station down the street. She looked down at her hands, which had a couple of fresh blisters starting to form, and then up at me. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm sorry for what I said at Roland's. I'm sorry for all of it." I took a drink of the water and looked out the window at the parking lot below, where a light snow was starting to fall under the streetlights. "You don't owe me another apology, sweetheart," I told her. "You're paying your own rent now, with your own money, on your own name. That makes you a grown woman, and that's the only thing I ever actually wanted for you." She didn't say much else after that. She just nodded, her eyes glassy, and reached over to squeeze my hand the way she used to when she was small, and we'd walk together into church on Sunday mornings. Revenge, I've come to understand at 63 years old, isn't always about winning an argument or watching somebody else fall apart in front of you. Sometimes the truest form of it is simply stepping back, letting the safety net disappear, and trusting reality to teach the lesson you could never quite get across with words alone. It lets a person finally see the actual value of what they were so ready to throw away. Sam doesn't mention Roland's business ventures anymore. His dealership group filed for restructuring under a bankruptcy court that spring, and I heard through the grapevine that 2 of his showroom lots got repossessed by the bank within a matter of weeks. Derek picked up extra shifts and eventually enrolled in night classes to get certified in something with real long-term stability, a decision that made me prouder than almost anything else that happened that whole year. Sam comes by nearly every Sunday now, not looking for a check, just to sit on my back porch with a cup of coffee and ask me questions about the plant, about her mother, about how I managed to keep 3 shifts of grown men in line for almost 4 decades without ever once raising my voice. Those are the conversations I always hoped we'd have. It just took losing everything shiny for her to want to hear them.